here with me? This is Paul Forrest. He's our speaker today. And he and his wife, Gail McDonald, retired to Port Angeles in 2013. He is an agronomist who spent a career in crop production, agribusiness, and commercial lending to agribusiness, and 20 years working long-term and short-term on U.S. government-funded international agricultural development projects. Paul has a BA in economics, a bachelor's of science in crop science, and a master of science in agronomy and plant genetics. He has been on hundreds of farms on 6 continents. After looking at the sad state of the urban tree canopy in Port Angeles, in 2018, Paul began leading a state tree program, which he will be presenting today. And trees are near and dear to my heart, so with great happiness, I present to you Paul Forrest.
Thank you, Kathy.
What a great name.
So let's see, I need to get a screen share, is that right?
Yes.
Right here. Yeah. And then what do I do?
You're gonna
Let me get my glasses.
put it on your presentation. Right
Okay.
there.
Oh, right here.
Yeah, and then share.
Share. Okay, and then if I go down here someplace,
Yeah, you're gonna,
right there.
Yeah.
Should be the slideshow.
not so.
Oh, there it goes. Okay. All right. Good morning.
I'm gonna hold the camera before you get it.
I really appreciate Kathy's help with all the technical setup. I was telling her I was at a meeting on Tuesday afternoon at the Conservation District, and they also were doing their first meeting in person with virtual, but they didn't start working on the setup until the meeting was supposed to start, so we started like 20 minutes late. So anyway, it's nice to be here. I think you all know Corey Delicott, the Parks Director. I have been on the Parks and Recreation Commission now for a number of years, just got reelected again. And Corey's a good buddy. And I mentioned I'd be talking to you guys, and he said, "Oh, you're really hitting the big time." So here we are. I saw an exhibit at the old Historical Society. Used to be in the no, it was in the library, the old library, Carnegie Library on Lincoln, and it was photographs. This was they were taken in the 50s, and this exhibit was like, I saw this around 2007. And after looking at all these pictures of Port Angeles, I said to my wife, "Gosh, I think there used to be more trees then than there are now." Well, I've looked around and I think that's true. So I can't do much about what's in your backyard or your side yard or right in front of your house, but we can do some street trees. So let's see here if we can. My opinion is this is a nice looking street. It's got great street trees. These are fairly modest homes. These are not, and this is not an upscale neighborhood, but it looks great. And I think this is what, I grew up in Corvallis, Oregon. This is what streets are supposed to look like. But here's how I started my project. And I think trees are a good thing, but I started my program, my street tree project, knowing that the process for getting them in the ground has yet to be done. I can grow the trees, and that's what I'm doing, but there's still a lot of other stuff that the city needs to do. So here's the idea. You get a free tree, and the permit for getting the tree is free. Right now it's $40. If you would like to buy a tree, you can still get a free permit. You can get a free tree, and you get free help to plant it. I think it's pretty simple. So there are lots of places all across America that have street tree programs, and we can do this. I'm committed to delivering 1,500 trees at 4 inches of elevation off of the from the root flare. Should be 1 inch diameter, and the tree should be 6 feet tall. I'm working with the city staff, mainly with Thomas Hunter and his people, occasionally, to move this forward. If you know Thomas Hunter or Nathan West, say hi for me and tell them to move along. So in front of your house, there's a right of way, and it's usually it's 10 to 13 feet wide from the edge of the paving. So most people think that they own all the way out to the curb, and that's really not true. Typically, you have a sidewalk and then a planting strip and then a curb in the street. And from the edge of the sidewalk near your house, the sidewalk isn't yours, and the planting strip isn't yours either. That's city property. But you can grow stuff in it, you can plant in it, you can take care of it, and that's where we would like to put these trees. So here's some street tree scenes around Port Angeles. Let me get my list here. Here's 7th Street west of Cherry Street. Nice row of trees. Here's Cedar Street between 9th Street and 10th Street. This is between the Bridges neighborhood, which has a very low number of street trees. Here's the 11th Street between Eunice and Francis. Notice these trees aren't real big, but they look great, and you don't have to have super tall trees to have nice street trees. Here's Eckhart Street west of Porter Street. Nice neighborhood, but no street trees. This is 3rd Street between Pine and Cedar. I have a friend who lives across the street from this, and he said people walk to include this in their walks when they go around town. It is. Oh, do you? Okay, yeah. Here we have Campbell Street in the 12 and 1300 block. Not too many trees. This is Albert Street south of 8th Street. Notice these trees. Here we have a street, curb, sidewalk, and then the planting strip. So these are street trees. These are in the city right of way. Here's D Street north of 7th Street. Not too many trees. Pretty barren there. Here's Oak Street between 5th and 6th Streets. These are like flowering plums and prunus species. Somewhere in the past, and maybe 30 or 40 years ago, somebody went ape all over town and planted lots of these, and a lot of them are dying out, but we still have quite a few. This is C Street south of Spruce. Nice apartment blocks, but not so many trees. This is 5th Street in front of City Hall. The guys that work at the city, they know what street trees are. They have nice street trees in front of their premises. We should have them too, right? So in our municipal code, it lists what's good about street trees. And I think we don't need to argue that street trees do all kinds of great stuff. It's healthy and beautiful and so on. My opinion is that the very best reason for having street trees is this last one. It improves how you feel when you're walking down the street. It's good for your mental health, and it makes everybody feel better. This has been proven by lots of studies. Oh, by the way, the next to the last one. In fact, street trees improve your property value. Now, this is a study done in 2011. The city hired out. Hard to read it up here, but we look in the right-hand column. We see we don't have very many numbers over 40, which is the number you're looking for. The only one is public buildings and parks. But a lot of these areas these zones don't have many trees. The city has control over the right-of-ways, but those right-of-ways in this survey only had 19% canopy cover. So even on the city right-of-ways, it could have a lot more. My opinion is that estimate is that the average block from one corner to the next corner, you count on both sides of the street, there's only 4 or 5 trees. There are a lot of blocks that have no trees at all. But we have space to put in 1,500 trees. Okay, the city has a list of recommended street trees. And planting trees you choose from this list. And the main reason is because they're not going to tear up the sidewalks and curbs and sewer system. But anyway, they have tall trees and medium trees and small trees. And they are all deciduous in single trunk. A lot of the reason they're single trunk is for a driver's view. doesn't, if you have a multiple trunk bushy tree, you can't see through it. So I started looking into doing this project in 2018. I immediately eliminated all the tall trees because trees that are 65 feet to 100 feet more, your neighbors don't like it. Okay. Medium trees, they'll tolerate. Short trees, no problem. But you put up really, really tall trees and you start having unhappiness. I was originally working with 11 species. Now I'm working with 10. One of them did make it. And in these pictures I'm going to show you, you'll notice that they're not tearing up the environment. So I took all these pictures off of the internet. This is a pear Davidson maple. These grow to be 20 feet tall by about 35 feet wide. In Port Angeles, most of the power lines for east-west streets run in the alleys. On the north-south streets, they run above the parking strip. They run right next to the street. So if you live on a north-south street, you're going to be planting a tree under power lines. Well, if you plant a tree that's only going to get to be 20 or 30 feet tall, that's perfectly okay. You shouldn't be planting something that's going to be 40 or 50 feet tall because you'll have a big problem. So I have a fair number of short trees. This is a mirror maple. This grows to be 30 feet by 20 feet. This is a full-size specimen right here. This is a katsura tree. These grow to be 40 feet by 40 feet. So this is still a fairly young tree. This is a golden rain tree. These grow 30 feet by 30 feet, have nice spring flowers. Here we have some Persian ironwood. This is down on the campus of Oregon State in Corvallis. These grow to be 30 feet by 20 feet. This is scarlet oak, very pyramidal tree. I speak pyramid shape. Great colors in the fall. These grow to be 60 feet by 45 feet. Good sized tree. This is a Gary oak or an Oregon white oak. That's the only tree that I'm growing that's a native species. In fact, on the city's list, there are not very many native species. Native is a wonderful thing to grow, except you want to make sure again that it's not going to tear up the infrastructure. These also happen to go very slow, much more slowly than I was anticipating, and I wish they would go faster because I have a couple hundred of them. This is English oak, very hardy, very classical, 60 feet by 40 feet. This is Japanese Stewartia, it's not columnar, but nearly so. And I couldn't find a good columnar tree to grow, which is what you need in a narrow parkway. And lastly, we have a Japanese pagoda tree. It has great flowers in the spring, and these grow to be 45 feet by 35 feet. So, growing the trees. I'm actually an agronomist, not a horticulturist. I worked my life with food crops. I worked with all of the world's major food crops and lots of minor crops, but not in nurseries. But, there's some similarities. So I got seeds, started in the fridge. A lot of them have to be in the refrigerator. They put them in the flats, and every year they go to the next larger container. We'll see this as we go along here. Here's this on my back porch, and in those bags, there's some sand and there are acorns. Here's a 72 cell tray. You can start seeds this way as well. Another method, depends on what they are. Here's a common trays furrow. These are maple seeds going in here. So I made little furrows and put the seeds in and use a trowel to tamp them down, and they're pretty good. You put them in a greenhouse, you can pop them up and get them going, and you put them outside to harden off, and they're covered with the screen is to keep out varmints so that they're not eating, it's like alfalfa sprouts, right? If you're a squirrel, these taste really good. And the cloth over the trays is to prevent seeds from cottonwood trees and everything else blowing into your trays. Here's what they look like when they come up. We're going to transplant these. Nice little root systems on them, very, very fibrous roots. I put them in these tubes. These tubes are 10 cubic inches. There are 98 tubes in a rack. So you can have them packed together fairly closely. Here's some oaks, acorns, right? Also in those tubes. They pop up very nicely. Look at that. See how they're doing? Here's we're taking them, then we're going to transplant them from those tubes. You can see one laying on the table there into these mini tree pots. These are 3 inches by 3 inches by 9 inches. So here's what they look like transplanted. And then later on, this is a different oak. We're going to transplant these from mini tree pots to tall tree pots. So these are 4.5 inches, 4 inches by 4 inches by 14 inches. So now we have a much taller container. That's what they look like when they get transplanted out. Eventually, trees go into number 5 containers, about 4 gallons. People call it a 5-gallon container. It's really only 4 gallons. Anyway, number 5 containers. So this is the next step up. I'm hoping that I don't have to go to number 7 containers, just more potting mix. This is Dave Allen and Christina St. John, the people who run the nursery where I have my trees. They're really nice. They are horticulturists. They've given me tons of great advice and encouragement, and they tell me when I'm doing things stupid, you know. When I'm a good boy, I get to drive this tractor. It's like a ride at Disneyland. It's really a lot of fun. Okay, here are my trees in the nursery. Here's the container yard. When this photograph was taken, there were about 1,200 trees. I have about 1,900 now. Here's a Gary oak that's 2 years old. Here's another one. This is ready to go into a number 5 container. Here's an English oak, 1 year old. Here's an English oak that's 2 years old. This oak tree this fall will be ready to plant in front of your house. Okay. Here's a scarlet oak that's only 13 months old, doing really great. Here's a golden rain. This is 2 years old again. This tree will be big enough to plant out this October. Katsura tree, also ready for this October. This is a Japanese pagoda tree. It's tall enough, but I think it's going to need another year to get a bit fat enough. It's too whippy. The trunk is too small. Here's a Perry David's maple, 1 year old. Here's an Amur maple, also 1 year old. Here we are in the middle of December. These are deciduous trees, right? They lose their leaves. They get pretty naked with them. And here's how we greeted the new year after we had that snowstorm at Christmas time. Looked like great big snow cones. So when I finished the year, I had about 1,200 trees, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm not going to be able to deliver 1,500 trees if I only have 1,200 now. So I added another 750 trees approximately, and I'm now over 1,900. So in February, I got these. This is a more golden rain, about 100 of these. I got some Persian ironwood, about 200. These are all saplings. And here's some Japanese Stewartia, also 200 of these. I also got some scarlet oak, 220 of them that I just finished potting on Tuesday of this week. I neglected to get a photograph for you, but anyway, there's more of those too. They look just like these. So here's a spreadsheet of I have. Mini tree pots, tall tree pots, and number 5 containers, and then the total. So you see we have 1,900. If you did some quick math and looked at which ones are oaks and which ones are maples, you'd figure out that about 3/4 of them are different species of oaks and maples. Well, Among other things, they are the survivors. They have done well in the nursery. And if you look around town, you'll see lots of oaks and maples because they do really well here. So despite my preference, my desire to have other varieties of trees, that nature kind of directed me this way. Uh, if you look at our municipal code, it dictates that we use what's called the rigid cell method. My opinion is that this method that's advocated or dictated by the city code should only be for commercial properties and industrial areas and in residential developments, because here's what it's asking you to do. You need to dig a hole. It's about 4 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet, and put a line on the curb side and put a liner on the sidewalk side. You need to buy a tree that at chest height is 3 inches in diameter, which is going to be a tree that's 15 or 20 feet tall when you buy it. It's going to have a big root ball like this. So it's going to arrive on a flatbed truck, and you're going to need a crane to put it in place, right? And the average homeowner isn't going to do this. So if you go around and you talk to people who have planted trees in their parking strip, in their planting strip, how did you choose the tree? Well, we kind of liked this tree and we bought it at the nursery and we stuck it in the ground. Did you talk to the city about what you might do here? Why would I talk to the city? No, nobody talks to the city because they're not going to use this method. This is very expensive. So there's a publication put out by the International Society of Arboriculturalists that matches up with our, that we could cite in our code. It would get us off the hook. You'll notice here is ANSI A300 Part 6. If I go back a couple slides, we are already quoting parts 1, 2, and 3. We just need to add part 6, and we're in business. Okay, but it requires this little tiny change to our municipal code. And if we change it, we can plant trees like the rest of the world does. This is a photograph taken in Vancouver, Washington. Guys out there planting trees. You dig a hole only as deep as that container, maybe 2 or 3 times the width. It's bowl shaped. Just put the tree in there, use the same soil that you excavated, put it back in, and voila, you have a tree. Not real complicated. You don't need a crane, you know. Also in our ordinances, we don't have as many guidelines on distances and clearances and spacings as we should have. So here I'm advocating for the city to adopt some simple rules on how wide the planting strip can be given how big a tree you want to put, and how far apart they should be within that planting strip. And also we have clearances and setbacks from fire hydrants and alleys and driveways and so on. And these should all be stipulated somewhere in our regulations, and they are not. Only a few of them are actually. Okay, so the proposed program is that the process would be free. You would do it online. And if you want a free tree, you're going to sign a little maintenance agreement, because you need to take care of the tree and water it, and later on in its life prune it and so on. The processing of these would not be done by city staff, but would be done by volunteers who are free. They'd come out to your house and look at where you're proposing to put the tree and make sure the location's okay and the size of the tree is okay and the spacing is okay. They would still have to get the 811 call before you dig people involved. But the nice thing in the city is that all of our utilities are also under the jurisdiction of the city itself. So we're not calling in Pacific Gas Electric Company or Bonneville Power or anybody else. It's all in-house. So we would plant these trees in October. You can put on your calendar October 15th. We'll be planting our first trees. We would organize these logistics by neighborhood, and hopefully have neighborhood stewards who would be willing to walk around the neighborhood in the summertime and see if people are watering their trees like they need to, because the first but the first 2 summers you'll need to water and kind of help take care of the trees in that respect. That's about it. But we can do this. We can have a street tree program in this town. And so if you know Nathan West or Thomas Hunter, you need to work them along. And we're going to, October 15th will be our first planting. Unfortunately, this first year, we'll only have about 100 trees. But I think that's a good test. So that next year when we have 300 trees, or the next year when we have 400 trees, we're prepared to put them in. It'll take the whole weekend, Saturday and Sunday, but I think we'll have enough volunteers, just a few hours to put some trees in the ground. And so when this is rolled out one of these days, please jump in and volunteer. So thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here, happy to answer your questions. If you know of another organization that would like to hear about this, I'm happy to make a presentation. But I thank you. Questions?
Just stick around in case people have questions.
Yes,
and everything.
of course.
That'd be great. I'm
Yeah.
gonna go ahead and let the Zoom people go ahead and we'll go ahead and call the meeting at this time. And thank you everybody for coming in, and we'll see you next Friday. All righty.
Well, that's good. Thank you. Well done, Paul. Thank you.
Paul, do you have a website where you list all those trees?
I don't. Because I want the city to have a website. The city needs to do this, right? I don't want to set up, I'm not going to set up a nonprofit. And so the city has a